We are proud to have Remitly on board as our headline sponsors during the IPL this season. When it comes to family, no matter how far they are, they're always close to our hearts. Perhaps it's why millions of people trust Remitly to send money worldwide. It's easy to send money quickly, safely, and affordably. And with Remitly's great exchange rates and low fees, more of the money you send reaches the people who matter most. Because at the end of the day, family is everything. Download the Remitly app today and enjoy a special offer on your first transfer. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. It's one of our favourite episodes of the year. It's the 2025 Wisden special. We've got Lawrence Booth with us today. We'll talk about all the Wisden award winners and also get stuck into the editor's notes and all the other great things that are included in the 2025 Wisden Almanack out on Thursday. And of course, we'll be spending plenty of time talking about the latest round of the County Championship as well. I'm Rana, this is Lawrence Booth, and we've got Ben Gardner as well today. Mark Butcher will be joining us later on the show. Before we start properly, a reminder that we've been busy on the old Patreon. We have 2 extra episodes a week at the moment. One is just on the County Championship that hits your feeds 2 hours after the hands are shaken at the last game of the round. And then we have an extra episode on something else. So last week we had an April mailbag special. This week we'll be doing a statistical deep dive. We do an Ashes deep dive once a month. So yeah, there's a bit of everything for you. Ben, you're a big fan of the chat at the moment.
Oh yeah, no, it's really good stuff. I'm always stealing things people say and pretending they're my own ideas. So yeah, that's very useful.
Lawrence, great to have you on. Let's get straight into it. Who are the 5?
The 5 cricketers this year: Gus Atkinson, Liam Dawson, Sophie Eccleston, Jamie Smith and Dan Worrell.
Are there any criteria for how they're chosen in case people are listening for the first time?
Those aren't the best 5 cricketers in the world.
That's a very mischievous question. The emphasis is on the previous English summer, and you can't have been chosen more than once.
Talk us through the 5 then. Let's start with Gus Atkinson. I can't really remember a better first home international summer than Gus Atkinson's.
First test here, Jimmy Anderson's last, and Atkinson almost stole the show, 12 wickets on debut. And from that moment, I was thinking, he's going to have to do something pretty bad not to be one of the 5. In fact, he did lots of very good things after that 5 against Sri Lanka, 100 at number 8. And then even though it was outside our parameters, a hat-trick against New Zealand at Wellington was kind of the icing on the cake. 52 wickets in his first year as a Test cricketer at 22 apiece. Not bad and a bit of a gimme.
And Jamie Smith had a similar-ish start to international cricket as well.
Yeah, 70 here on debut against West Indies. Hit one sort of out of the ground in that direction. 95 at Edgbaston. You thought, he missed his chance to score a Test 100. He solved that immediately against Sri Lanka at Old Trafford. Brilliant first innings 100, and then an important cameo in a tricky chase second dig. So every time England were in a bit of trouble, he stepped forth. And the debate about the wicket-keeping situation, which had been rumbling for about 2 or 3 years, this great psychodrama between Bairstow and Folkes and a bit of Buttler, was over. We all forgot about that.
Longer than 2 or 3 years. It felt like a decade, pretty much.
Probably did.
And on Sophie Eccleston, I was actually surprised that she hadn't won it before. Yeah. But B, I just thought, I can't remember anything especially different about her summer. Then I looked at her numbers, which were totally ludicrous.
The numbers are mad. And actually, the whole England women's story, because it took a sort of turn for the worse over the winter, you kind of forget that last summer they were unbeaten. And Eccleston was at the forefront of that. She took, I think it was 26 wickets in the 2 white ball formats at under 10 apiece. I mean, ludicrous stuff. Went for 3 and over in white ball cricket, became England's leading wicket taker in T20 international. So again, yeah, I mean, she'd been quite close for a number of years, actually. She was probably 6th, 7th or 8th for about 2 or 3 years. So it was nice to be able to give it to her finally.
And do you take into account at all what happens after September the 30th? So obviously the wheels came off a little bit, well, completely for England women's side over the winter. Does that come into any consideration, or is it just the English summer?
No, you have to be strict and say, look, we are picking on the English summer, so we have to ignore what's happened. People in future years will pick up the book thinking who had a good English summer, I hope, despite always the arguments we always get into each year. So no, I mean, they'd have to do something pretty bad, like commit murder or something like that to lose out on the, and we haven't had that yet, as far as I know.
But I guess you did, just thinking back, that was almost the Mohammed Amir situation, right? Was that you left
good point.
Left a spot blank but I mean, that did happen during the summer.
And that was, in fairness, before my stint. But no, that is a very good point. That in fact, I think Wisden, it was Shield Berry's time, and they didn't even name the person who wasn't going to get it. Everyone guessed at Mohammed Amir, which probably a fair guess. But they went with 4 cricketers of the year. So no, I take that back. Good shout.
But yeah, I guess a question sort of more generally about how you pick the cricketers. Do you feel a need to kind of cover off the whole game, as it were, to say, like, you've got the county championship covered, you've got the test side covered? Because I noticed that this is the first year, I think, since 2000 the 2005 Almanack's one that came out before that, Ashes, where you haven't had an overseas cricketer, if we now say that Dan Worrell is English. And I guess there would have been possible contenders. You know, you had Nissanka making that 100 to win a test match, had Seals, who was good during that West Indies series and good for Sussex. But do you think you have to kind of stay honest to it, or do you think there is a little bit of like making sure you've covered off various aspects of the award?
I would say if that happens, it's a bonus. Like, you get an overseas player, you get a county player, you get a woman or two, you get an England men's player or two. But I'm always trying to be sort of honest to the criteria and say who were the best 5 from those eligible. Someone asked me on Twitter this morning, you went with why the focus on county players this year? In fact, there's only really Dawson and Worrell who were chosen for their county stuff. So 3 of them were chosen for international cricket. No, and I don't even feel the need to choose a woman. You know, so I mean, women have now become sort of increasingly a part of the 5, and I chose 3 in 2018 after they won the World Cup here in 2017. Some people said that was tokenism. I always say to them in response, who would you have chosen instead? And because, you have to offer a stronger solution if you're going to criticise the 5, and I couldn't think of any better. So no, I'm always choosing the best 5, and as I say, if they represent the game as a whole, then great.
Liam Dawson had a crazily good year for Hampshire, averaging 60 with about 25 with the ball. We talk about him loads on the podcast. Do you think he'll play for England this year?
I'd say it's unlikely, but it's less unlikely than it was about a year ago, because I think the Shoaib Bashir question is rumbling on. England have nailed their colours to his mast. They want him to succeed. 49 test wickets in his first year, but an average of 40. So kind of, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Is he the man to trouble India and Australia? We don't know. Dawson would offer them something more consistent, perhaps lack the wicket-taking potential. They think at international level you need a spinner who can get turn and bounce, and with Bashir's height, that's where his advantages over Dawson. But the Dawson came close last year as well. He's had 2 astonishing years. His some career averages have both gone up in the last 2 or 3 years, and he's probably the premier all-rounder in county cricket now. So I thought, again, though Hampshire didn't win the title, he had such a stunning year that we had to pick him.
Another county cricketer who had a stunning year, Dan Worrell. Obviously, a lot of England talk at the moment, but actually in 2024 for Surrey, he was irresistible.
He was 50-odd wickets at 16, and Surrey, of course, were pushing for a 3rd successive title. No county had done that since Yorkshire in the 60s, so the three-peat was a massive story in English cricket, and Worrell was at the heart of that talk of whether he'll play for England this summer. I doubt it personally, but it's a good angle.
And then the other big awards, leading men's cricketer, leading women's cricketer, leading T20 cricketer, and the Wisden Trophy for the best individual test performance of the year. Just starting with that one, actually, I loved that Santner at Pune won it, because it's something that I suppose if you're not a New Zealand fan or an India fan, you might not remember it. But on paper, that is one of the most significant test results in a long time, but also an amazing performance within that.
Yeah, India hadn't lost a test. In fact, they'd won every test series at home since England and won there under Cook in 2012-13. So for New Zealand to win there was astonishing. For them to win 3-0 was freakish. And Santner, he only played 1 test that series, but 13 wickets at Pune. That was the game that won them the series. Shamar Joseph came close for his heroics at Gabba at the start of the year. And a lot of people would have chosen that as the sort of the bowling spell of the year, but I couldn't look past the fact that you had this New Zealand spinner, a guy who'd never taken more than 3 in an innings in Test cricket, suddenly out bowling India spinners in their own conditions. It was an amazing performance.
It's also one of the things I really like about how you've changed the Wisden Trophies. It's for a whole Test performance, isn't it? So that was when was Bairstow the first winner? I think he was, wasn't he? And he obviously had such an extraordinary summer, but it was the Test in which he'd made the 200s, which makes it easy to choose. And again, with Joseph versus Santner, maybe if you were picking a Test spell of the year in 1 innings, you'd go for Joseph. If you're going for a whole Test, and Santner made runs in that game. And I found it astonishing reading the write-up of it that he'd never taken more than 3 wickets in an innings before, and then doubled that in both innings in that game.
I mean, Shamar Joseph was probably the kind of emotional pick, which the whole world got carried away with, and understandably. But actually, when you kind of used your sort of head, not your heart, I think it was probably Santner.
Leading men's cricketer, this was quite easy, wasn't it?
It's probably the easiest leading men's cricketer I've ever had. I mean, Jasper, if you were to pick a a World 11 for any format, he's the first name on the list for any format. And that is basically the definition of the leading cricketer in the world. So he was dead easy, 72 wickets at under 15. And then he bowled that remarkable spell in Barbados to, people said South Africa choked, but India bowled brilliantly. And he was at the heart of that.
Well, player of the tournament at the T20 World Cup, they win. And then in Test cricket, he took 71 wickets at 13 or 14. In the history of the game, only SF Barnes in 1912 and Imran Khan in 1982 have taken more than 50 wickets in a calendar year under 15. So that's the sort of caliber that he belongs in. In terms of the all-time conversation with Bumrah, are we now getting to a point where we can genuinely compare him to the very, very best to ever do it?
I think so. It was notoriously hard comparing eras, but he's the first bowler with at least 200 wickets under 20 in the history of the game. And SF Barnes was cut off at 189 at 16. George Lohmann took 100 odd at 10. But the pitches and techniques were so different in those days that it's hard to compare. I think you can only compare within an era, and Bumrah seems so far ahead of his contemporaries. I mean, he was the one who kept India afloat in the Border Gavaskar. They lost 3-1. They could have lost 5-0 without him. And he could win India the series this summer against England. Just if he has 3 good tests, that could be series over. He's that good. He's the player that England will want to see off. They'll think if they can get through an opening spell from Bumrah, they can beat India. If they don't, it'll be different.
And I think especially the 3 formats are increasingly siloed off away from each other. You look at India, they are increasingly close to being able to field 3 separate 11s for the 3 formats. Bumrah is the main man when fit in all of them. And the other 2 big awards, leading women's cricket of the year, Smriti Mandhana, she broke records in both ODI cricket and T20 cricket and scored a Test 100 in her own innings.
Yeah, not bad. Again, I think, what was it, 1,690 odd runs in the calendar year, which was a record for a woman in international cricket. 4 ODI hundreds, which was another record. I mean, she broke records for fun, and that's a strong Indian side. And she is, she again would be one of the first names you'd write down on a world level. Not quite in Bumrah's class, but she was still head and shoulder. Australia have lots of good players, but she stood out in a way that none of them did.
And then finally, leading T20 cricketer of the year. So this could be won by a man or a woman.
Yeah.
This year, Nicholas Pooran is the winner. I know he's having an amazing IPL. I don't think I appreciated just how good his 2024 was.
2,000, God, I've got it down here somewhere, 2,200 and something runs.
I was going to say, you can tell you've done a few of these interviews because you're just reeling off Smriti Mandhana's calendar year total.
Lawrence just knows this stuff.
2,331 runs, which was another record
Yeah.
in all T20 matches. And he hit 176s, which is one every 8-point-something balls. That is ludicrous. And it continues a proud West Indian tradition in that award. Hayley Matthews won it last year. We've had Kyron Pollard, Andre Russell before. So Pooran is the man very much in T20.
Moving on to the editor's note. So if you've not bought a Wisden before, I suppose to someone who's a casual cricket fan who might be a newish listener to the show, they know about the Wisden Almanack. I suppose the reputation of it is that it's a book of record. It's got all the numbers. It's a great historical tool, I suppose. But actually, when you actually buy one and read it, the first 200 pages is full of excellent cricket writing. There's plenty of brilliant features that we'll touch on later, but it kicks off with your editor's notes. And it sort of feels, and correct me if I'm wrong, like a sort of state of the nation type thing on where cricket is at this particular point in time.
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words. I mean, yes, it's a sort of soapbox, isn't it? It's a sort of grandiose soapbox where the editor, whoever it is at the time, gets to write about 5,000 words. It's about 10 pages in small print in this book on whatever subject he or she feels most interested them from the previous year. And people sometimes call us the conscience of cricket. So it does feel in an era when administrations are held to account less than they used to be, I would argue. It's Wisden's chance to fill the gap there a little bit. So I've gone, we'll get onto this no doubt, but I've gone hard at the global administration with a particular focus on India. And I see it as a chance for Wisden to exercise that role as cricket's conscience.
Yeah, let's get into it. You didn't shy away at all. You literally start sort of highlighting the awkwardness of Jay Shah's unopposed ascension from BCCI secretary to ICC chair. Just quoting one line from it: 2024 was the year cricket gave up any claim to being properly administered with checks, balances and governance for the many, not the few. I suppose taking a step back, why is Shah's rise so problematic?
Well, why is a monopoly problematic? Let's rephrase it. the moment any one institution or country has dominance over the rest in any organisation, that organisation will corrode from the inside out. That is just how things work. If they're not challenged the right way, if the checks and balances you just mentioned aren't there, with the best will in the world, things will happen that wouldn't previously have happened if they were being held to account properly by other nations. I mean, let's look at the most recent example, the Champions Trophy. India, BCI had agreed to that schedule 3 years ago. Pakistan, the host, now it's always problematic, of course, because the Indian government say that we don't want any bilateral relations with Pakistan, and the BCI are happy to go along with that. But then it's only 2 or 3 months before the tournament they pull out of that. And my point about starting with Jay Shah was that we had this very strange situation where, the way I write it, 11:59 p.m. on November the 30th, he was honorary secretary of the BCCI, who were causing merry havoc with the Champions Trophy plans. And at midnight, the clock strikes midnight, and he's chair of the ICC, whose main project at that moment is getting the Champions Trophy off the ground. So serious sports don't run themselves in this way. There's a clear conflict of interest there, and the rest of the boards really should have put their heads together and said, we can't have this. This isn't Jay Shah's moment. He will get his time. India deserve a person in that position at some point. But it was the wrong moment to do it, and it simply tightened India's grip on the game. We're all very grateful for the money Indian cricket brings into the game. The money their vast TV audience generate are crucial. Bankrolls the game, fine. Does that then necessarily have to equate to administrative dominance as well? I would argue that's a bad thing. I mentioned the Champions Trophy there. The advantages, the competitive advantages they had. Even Mohammed Shami admitted it, so that was an awkward moment for India because they were denying it. Gautam Gambhir says that anyone making that point that they had an advantage playing all the games in Dubai were perpetual cribbers. The very next day, Shami says, "Oh no, of course it's an advantage. We got used to the conditions." The T20 World Cup last year, they knew their semi-final was going to be in Guyana, and then you get further down the kind of list of mini advantages, and you see that Virat Kohli was more or less let off for shoulder charging Sam Constas during the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Kagiso Rabada had got far worse fine for doing something far less serious a couple of years earlier. We had Javagal Srinath, the match referee, saying that Harshit Rana was a like-for-like replacement for Shivam Dubey during the one-day series against England. Clearly wasn't the case. But people don't question these things when monopolies exist because no one wants to rock the boat. So that is the position we're in. It's not an anti-Indian thing. I mean, I get called all sorts of things on social media. Apparently, I'm desperately sad that the empire no longer exists. I couldn't give two hoots about that. I care about the serious, responsible administration of the game, and I don't think that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, and I sometimes feel like there can be a sense with Indian power and the BCI that things aren't quite as bad as they maybe could be, or that the worst predictions are, say. So, maybe like 5 years ago, people would have predicted, a 6-month IPL and international cricket basically not existing when, the IPL has expanded, but not maybe as fast as people think. And actually, India do their bit to kind of keep international cricket going in some ways. Like they play more of it than anyone else. They even, they're playing these kind of development tournaments. Like India are playing, say, they play A tournaments involving Nepal and the UAE and that sort of thing. And the ECB could look to that as sort of an example. But then I think if there's a point where you can think like, well, things could be worse, that you then don't look at I think Pakistan is in some ways they could be the immediate casualty when you look at actually how Pakistan are declining kind of across formats, and the fact that they're not going to be able to probably host a global tournament again properly, at least with things as they are, the money that stops them getting as well when they put all this money into building these stadiums and that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that like the effects are real. It's not just upset that it's someone else in charge and not us. It is that there are real things that are happening, even if there are all things that could be worse than the worst possible predictions, basically.
No, I think and it's a good point that India do spread their largesse in that sense. They send touring teams all around the world. Now, a cynic might argue that they're keeping people on side. They're ensuring votes at the board table. I couldn't possibly comment. The point about the IPL is also an interesting one. The IPL now has effectively several proxy tournaments around the world, and that is how they're currently spreading Indian influence. 4 of the 800 franchises, as we know, will be part-owned now by IPL teams. So Indian power is spreading in a different kind of way, even if the IPL itself hasn't sort of gone to 6 months. But no, India aren't totally irresponsible. I'm not arguing that. I'm trying to point out that there is a corrosive effect when one team has all the power and we're seeing it in increasing amount of ways. And I feel like the Champions Trophy, what happened there, was a bit of a tipping point for the public's perception of what India were doing. I've sort of written about India a bit in previous editors' notes, and it kind of gets ignored, doesn't move the dial. But I felt with the Champions Trophy that people are starting to cotton on to what's happening a bit more. Jay Shah has a great chance now to shape cricket in a responsible way. He's already done a good thing with the Afghanistan women's situation. The ICC, the BCCI, the ECB, and Cricket Australia have clubbed together and to fund the exiled Afghan women's cricketers in Australia. But of course, that should have happened a long time ago. That is the low-hanging fruit of global cricket administration. Let's see how balanced global cricket's going to be. Your point about Pakistan is a good one. It's hard to get round India's treatment of Pakistan when you consider the fact that Pakistan players are still banned from taking part in the IPL based on the Mumbai terror attacks of 2008. That doesn't make much sense to me when Pakistan have played, I think, 3 World Cups in India in the meantime without any security issues. So that smacks of vindictiveness, and I've not had a good argument as to why that can't happen on security grounds when the entire Pakistan team can go to India.
Yeah, what I'd say to add to this is that a lot of the lack of future-proofing for the game's future pre-exists Jay Shah becoming ICC chair. For a long time, the ICC let cricket drift and I suppose let market forces do their thing, and has left cricket, the wider game, in a weaker place. And I suppose in your acknowledgement of what is going on at the moment, of how the big three has become a big one, is there an implicit criticism of the former other two in the big three, in they are the two most powerful boards to potentially stand up to the BCCI or do more to future-proof the game? The ECB has now had this extraordinary windfall, and with it comes a bit of power as well. They haven't really done a lot.
No, I agree. Yes, I do allude to that. I go from the big three, as it was in the 2014 attempted power grab, to the big one. In England, Australia, as you say, are the only two countries with the heft to challenge it. They've chosen pragmatism over principle, essentially. That's been their sort of cricketing policy of the past decade. And it's left us in the situation we are now, where Jay Shah can waltz in unopposed. There was no vote. It was simply that he indicated he wanted the job and got it. Mm-hmm. And we then get an interview Greg Barclay did with the Telegraph, his predecessor as ICC chair, pleading with cricket not to fall under the yoke of India. And part of you think, well, you were in a position to stop that happening. But in fact, he wasn't. And that is the point about global cricket administration. Everyone kowtows to India with the consequences that we're seeing now, and the unforeseen ones ahead.
Just going to throw another of your lines back at you. Selfishness is now ingrained in the global game as T20 tournaments scramble for the best players, and the cricket itself becomes more one-dimensional. We talk a lot about the noise around the game itself, like the actual game of cricket. We talk about the economics around it and changing forces around it. I'm very interested by your comment about the actual game itself becoming more one-dimensional because of the sort of overall selfishness. What do you mean by that?
Well, it stems from a point that the World Cricketers Association had made, the Players Union, formerly FICA, about players going unpaid. So 17 of the 53 men's and women's leagues around the world, that's their count, players are either unpaid or paid late. And that is because there is this mad rush in every country to get a kind of future-proofing tournament going. We see it with the ECB with the 100. That's what the 100's about, because they're worried about TV rights of bilateral international cricket falling away after the current deal ends in 2027. And so there is this mad power grab. And the ECB, part of the rationale of the 100 is to crush Major League Cricket in America, which they regard as a rival. And until the money that ECB have got in were paying cricketers more than they'd earned from the 100s, where Pat Cummins signed a 4-year deal with San Francisco Unicorns. So until there is joined up thinking at ICC level and we get a proper structure in place, don't ask me what that structure is, by the way. Until that happens, we will get selfishness. We will get every country, as Kerry Packer famously said, it's every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. That is how world cricket looks at the moment, and we can be better than that.
You also criticised the proposed changes, or lack of change really, to the World Test Championship. Do you think that cricket has not completely missed, because there's time to turn it around, has missed an opportunity with the World Test Championship to make it something that is easier to follow and therefore get casual fans of Test cricket in particular more invested?
Yeah, it's maddening, really. I mean, you should not need a calculator to work out where your team is. I mean, look at football: 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw. Everyone knows what's going on. You can calculate your team's position at the end of each game. With cricket, it's a percent, because everyone's playing different games against different opponents, different length series. It is a mess. Now, this is not sour grapes from, I know that when Ben Stokes said what he said in New Zealand, it got easily depicted as sour grapes. Stokes was simply, I think, trying to make the point that it's not easy to follow, and that is madness. I've suggested a structure. I said it should be every 4 years. That works for rugby and football. Scarcity is not a bad thing, by the way. And you play, let's say you have 9 or 10 teams in the league, and you play each other either home or away for over minimum of 3 tests, and that way you get some sort of coherence. Everything counts equally. If the Ashes wants to be 5 tests, that's fine. Only the first 3 count. But it is a mess at the moment, and it should be better than that.
Ben, as someone who loves getting the calculator out at the end of each Test match, how do you respond to that?
Well, I thought you were going to start, don't get you on how many points a draw should be worth. But yeah, look, I think that the one sticking point I can see to that is just then India would have to play Pakistan in a bilateral Test series. And I suppose if you can solve the first of your problems, then you solve the second one. But that's what influences actually quietly a lot of structural decisions. Like you see the same with the Women's Championship as well. That is why not everyone plays everyone in that, and it can kind of go under the radar that is a barrier to having competitions that make sense.
It goes back to the previous point about growing a spine and saying to India, that's fine, if you don't want to play them, then you'll lose the Pakistan, get the points. Let's see if that changes views.
We've got some questions from listeners on the Patreon. So the first one, what's the biggest change the Almanack has undertaken since you've been editor?
Biggest change? The women's cricket has grown. It's growing each year. It'll grow again next year because of the change in the county structure. I mean, we were talking earlier about more women have been cricketers of the year. This year, in fact, for the first time, there is a women's school section. So there are enough girls' schools playing cricket now to justify a separate section. So that is a good thing, obviously. Since I've come in, we've introduced a T20 franchise section. Given what I've just said, you'd think, well, that's a terrible development. But we have to reflect how cricket is. So I would say those two have changed. What stayed the same is we try to be a mix of historical and contemporary and appeal to old readers and get new readers in. But yes, I'd say those are probably the 2 areas.
On a similar note, what is your proudest moment as editor, and what do you hope your legacy will be from your tenure?
Oh my word, proudest moment.
It must be a job that with it comes a lot of responsibility and therefore an element of pressure that probably doesn't exist for most cricket journalists.
No, well, I have to do interviews like this where I'm grilled. No, it's fine. It's great. It's great because it's good for Wisden, where I'm grilled and I have to justify my thoughts. So I know that when I'm writing the notes, I can't just write any old drivel, though you may disagree having read it. I have to go out and justify what I've written to hard-hitting journalists like you. So no, it's... getting the book out each year that sounds like a trite answer. The 150th edition, which was my second, was quite a big moment because it was a reminder of how long Wisden's been around. And I was asked then whether we'd existed another 150 years, and I couldn't say what the answer was. Mentioned earlier 3 women cricketers a year in 2018, which felt like a very natural choice. It wasn't forced, and that was a nice reflection of where women's cricket was at. Perhaps you could argue that women's cricket hasn't made in this country the leaps it should have done on the back of that 2017 win here against India. Getting the book finished each year, probably.
And finally, from Guy, he asks, in the days of written press and word in decline, what do you think Wisden still gives the reader that online publications can't, and how do you try and future-proof it to remain relevant for years to come? Obviously, you can read both things in print and online, but...
No, well, that's a good question. It probably strikes at the heart of what Wisden's role is now. I think in a world of hot takes and rolling news and social media, I hope there's still a voice for the voice that steps back essentially and takes a considered view. And it is still the case, whether we like it or not, that the Wisden editor's notes or the 5 cricketers make headlines each year. I'm doing a round of interviews today because, for whatever reason, probably tradition mainly, people are still interested in what Wisden has to say. And I think that says something. If you were starting from scratch, you probably Wisden wouldn't exist now, probably, because the stats are all updated by the second online. We've had to kind of rationalise our record section to reflect that. But I think the sense that what Wisden say matters, and that's developed over 162 editions, I think still interests people.
And within that, and I mentioned it up top, that there's brilliant writing every year in Wisden after your editor's notes, which is also brilliant. But in the first 200 pages, there's always a series of brilliant features. Do you want to pick out a few of them this year?
Gosh, there's a lot. Jim Wallace has done a very nice piece on the history of selection, where it goes through from getting an invite through the post through to a Brendan McCullum messaging Josh Hull in the shower on WhatsApp, and Hull ignoring it because it's a +64 number and he thinks some spam. It's actually McCullum saying, "Do you want to play for England, mate?" So it's a very nice kind of historical take on that. Shield Berry's done a nice piece on saluting Jimmy Anderson. Richard Gibson spoke to the wicket keepers who kept to Anderson, so the best view in the house, the men who saw his genius up front, and Tim Ambrose describing one piece of skill against, I think, bowling Brendan McCullum, I think actually at Trent Bridge in 2008 with a ball that started outside leg, bowled him off stump with McCullum aiming to whip through mid-wicket, and he said the view in the slip cordon wasn't, "Oh, that was a good piece of cricket." It was, "That's disgusting. That's just not cricket." So actually to get the views of the guys who had the best view in the house was quite good fun. Osman Samiuddin has done what sounds like a dry piece, was actually quite an important piece about it actually charts the rise of India's power through TV rights, and it's 25 years of ICC TV rights this year, anniversary. It may have passed you all by, but he charts it very well. He goes and he tries to answer the question of what percentage does India actually generate, because this percentage is always held over the game by India. Is it 70? Is it as high as 90? There is no definitive answer, by the way, but it's probably somewhere in the late 80s, and India, of course, use that to justify the money they take out of the ICC central pot. Osman wonders whether they might be a bit more socialistic, I suppose, with their output. So yes, lots to read, and hopefully readers enjoy it.
Well, it's out on Thursday, and as always, we're going to include the links to where you can buy it in the show notes. Before we head to Mark Butcher, England fans, this is one you won't want to miss. For the first time since 2019, England are heading to Ireland for a T20 series, and you can be there to witness every ball of it. From the 17th to the 21st of September this year, England take on Ireland in a thrilling 3-match T20 series at the stunning Malahide Cricket Ground, one of the most picturesque venues in world cricket. Choose to catch the final 2 games or follow the full series with Gullivers Sports Travel's fantastic ticket, hotel and travel options. Book now with Gullivers Travel. Visit gulliverstravel.co.uk to find out more. Next up, here's Mark Butcher on what makes a good finger spinner and why the nerds, which I'll include myself in, might have it wrong about what does and doesn't work in Australia these days. One of the selection debates going into the English summer is who's going to be England's spinner for not only this summer, but beyond in Australia. So I thought we'd strip things back a little bit and try and work out, what do you look for in a good orthodox spinner? So over the last few years, England have had someone like Moeen Ali, who is not the most conventional finger spinner in terms of he's someone who's quite aggressive, really rags the ball, was relatively expensive, but had a really good strike rate for a finger spinner. And in a way, they've tried to replicate that a bit in Shoaib Bashir. But I thought, just more generally, taking a step back, what is it that the really good orthodox finger spinners do well, who aren't your Ashwins, your Warnes, your Muraleys, who obviously have something different in their armoury?
The role of a finger spinner, particularly in Test match cricket, is very much dependent upon the conditions that you're playing in and the balance of the attack that you have. Now, if, for example, let's take Australia, for example, with Nathan Lyon, right? What has made him such a fabulous bowler? Well, he's played more often than not in like a 4-man attack. So he's had to be somebody that could keep a lid on scoring when conditions weren't conducive to him taking bags full of wickets, i.e. the first innings of a Test match on days 1, 2, and 3, and then is good enough when conditions become more in his favour later down the line in matches to win you games. And how does he do that? Well, he has variation, yes, in terms of flight and in terms of pace, but more than anything else, he has great accuracy. And I think that's pretty much what you're looking for. So in the case of, you mentioned Moeen Ali, and his role for England over the years has been, because of the style of bowler he is, and because of the makeup of England's attacks, a lot of the time when he was the lone spinner, it has been more based around having sort of 4 seam bowlers, and then Moeen would come in and bowl a short spell, perhaps try and pick up a wicket, try and break a partnership, and then would be somebody that you would hope would do something good for you down the line at the back end of the game. But he wasn't the guy that you were going to go, you know what, we're going to have Mo hold an end up for us for 30 overs and rotate the seamers from the other. And that isn't the way that England have traditionally played, simply because they haven't had a Graham Swann to call upon. If you think about England's only success down under crikey. So Gower's team, Gatting's team was the last one to do it before Alistair Cook's back in 10-11. Swanee didn't take a massive amount of wickets on that trip. However, he was incredibly economical, allowed Cook to rotate his seam bowlers and keep them fresh for spells when either the Kookaburra was brand new or there was a bit of reverse or whatever there was. And so his role in Australia on that particular trip was absolutely invaluable, despite the fact that he wasn't knocking people over left, right, and centre. And that, I guess, is the kind of the balance of the type of spin bowler that you want depends very much upon the type of attack that you have for the conditions that you're playing in.
And a massive part of that is Ben Stokes' fitness, right? So for the last decade, pretty much, England have been able to field 4 seamers without sacrificing batting strength, because they've always had a seamer in the top 6. And when Stokes isn't fit, the configuration of the attack and whole lineup is different. So with Moeen, he wasn't necessarily expected to bowl the volume of overs that a Swann would have done for England. Swann predominantly played in an era when England didn't really have a frontline all-rounder. And Nathan Lyon, most of his Australia career, I know Cam Green and Mitch Marsh have played more in the last few years, but the majority of Lyon's career has been played without Australia fielding an all-rounder. And obviously the secret to bowling across the game is you want to create wicket-taking opportunities whilst not going for many runs. I think it's really interesting looking at the championship numbers for different spinners so far this season. And Shoaib Bashir, his difficulties are well known. He's averaging 150. But I think perhaps more interestingly at this time of the year is his economy rate is above 4 runs and over, whereas Liam Dawson, 1.96, Simon Harmer, 2.01, Jack Leach, 2.6. And actually, for Farhan Ahmed, Rahan's younger brother at Notts, who's bowling in Div 1, his economy is around 2.5 runs and over. Throwing it forward to Australia again is another factor that I guess the stats guys might just miss is it's really hot. So the idea of having 5 seamers is much easier to say when you're just looking at a laptop compared to taking the park when it's 40 degrees in Perth.
Well, listen, I have never ever thought that there was an occasion where you thought you were going to play 5 days of Test match cricket in Australia that you didn't need a specialist spin bowler. I've never thought that, and probably never will. Even if some of the pitches have become a little spicier, even if the Kookaburra ball is not the same as it has traditionally been, still you have conditions down there whereby you cannot be slogging your guts out as a seam bowler through a day and a half without having that respite of being able to rotate those seam bowlers with a spinner. And so that I think that still stands. You can end up with days of sort of like up to 40 degrees and things like that, and you're going to need the bowl spin. And so I have no truck. In fact, generally speaking, in any type of Test match cricket, I've never really held any truck with not picking a specialist spin bowler for it, unless you think the game's only going to be 2.5, 3 days long because of weather. Simply because of the way that conditions, either the physical ones on the field or the temperate ones outside of that can change wildly between first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day.
And it's hard to quantify, I guess, the impact of having a spinner who just gets through their work very quietly over a 5-match series. I mean, Swann in 2010-11, he only took 15 wickets at 40, but he bowled 219 overs, which was more than any other England bowler, and went at 2.7s. And Nathan Lyon this winter, actually, I know it was a Border Gavaskar Trophy series dominated by Seam, but Lyon went at less runs and over than any other Australian player who played more than a couple of games. So I guess that's the impact of that is quite not as straightforward to quantify.
Well, no, because, and I think if you ask any sort of fast bowlers whether or not they'd like to have a guy with the ability to bowl a third of the overs in a day's Test match cricket and go at twos, 2.5s, and allow them to kind of to regenerate and to re-energize, to be able to come back and bowl effective wicket taking spells, they would say I'd have one all day long. So look, England will be looking, hopefully. Well, no, they will. They'll be looking. They want somebody that can fulfil that role for them in the squad. And as to whether or not they feel they've got somebody who's good enough to do that is another question. So obviously Leach coming back into it and bowling a lot of overs so far. Obviously Dawson, who we've spoken about a lot. There are options there, and it will depend very much on how England feel that they're going to fit into the rest of the 11 and the squad as a whole, as to whether or not they go down that path again, or try to muddle it, try to fiddle it somehow by having extra seam bowlers, maybe a batter who bowls a bit of spin, Will Jacks, for example, to do a similar job to what Moeen Ali did, which was to offer them a bit of depth in terms of the batting lineup and the opportunity perhaps for somebody who really rags it to sort of take advantage on the occasion when the conditions allow.
Good day for the podcast, by the way. Liam Dawson announced as a Wisden Cricketer of the Year, our hard campaigning doing the trick. On Will Jacks, there's a really interesting piece from Matt Roller on ESPN Cricinfo this week about one of Will Jacks' performance in the IPL for Mumbai, where he actually did really well with the ball. And Matt noted that there are very, very few conventional off-spinners doing anything in the IPL at the moment. Even someone like Washington Sundar, who's in India's World Cup squad, doesn't necessarily make the Gujarat team all the time. But Will Jacks, who has quite an old school way of bowling his off breaks, he tosses it up, releases it from height and really does try to rag it. He's had a fair bit of success this tournament. Yeah. And there's, I suppose, a trend in the commentary around off-spin in white ball cricket that is I guess is saying that what we've previously seen finger spinners do, which is fire it in quickly and at pace and quite flat, that might not necessarily be the best way for finger spinners to go in T20 cricket.
Possibly. I mean, look at somebody like Mohammad Nabi, who's made a long and fruitful career out of it. I mean, he's an incredibly smart and very talented bowler, smashes it down the order as well. And a lot of the wickets he takes and a lot of the problems he causes is by bowling very, very slowly. He has the ability with a similar arm action to kind of to change his pace, change his trajectory at will. And that's what keeps batters guessing. Obviously, the old trope of sort of the ball turning back into right-handers and off spinners getting smashed is still very much alive and kicking, but it depends upon the off spinner. And clearly they're very handy to have in an 11 when the opposition has left-handers. But as a general rule, Nabi is somebody that you can rely on to bowl to right and left. It doesn't have to be the perfect matchup for him because he's very, very good at what he does.
We'll leave it there for this week, Butch. Enjoy the PSL. Catch you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
The Wisden Photograph of the Year winners were announced last week, with Quinn Rooney's photo of Nathan Lyon and almost all of his Australian colleagues appealing for LBW against India's Mohammad Siraj taking top spot. The amateur competition was won by Rajan Topiwala for his photo of the Dharamsala cricket ground during the England-India test last year. A big thank you to everyone who entered. We received a huge number of amazing photos from all corners of the globe that we'll sporadically be sharing across our social channels over the next few months. And thank you to our partners, FLASHBACK Cameras, for sponsoring this year's competition. FLASHBACK is a digital camera with an old school soul, designed to feel like a classic disposable while adding modern convenience. You get 27 photos that upload after 24 hours into an app, and you can go again with 27 more. With a winder, Xenon flash, and no instant previews, it brings back the magic of film photography in a whole new way. Find out more and buy yours now through the link in the description. Right, on to the county championship. Ben, Essex, Worcestershire, what a finish.
Yeah, a brilliant finish, and you can take that however you want to for whatever sort of whatever it is about cricket that you like. You'll have found it in this. There was a controversy to end it, and before that, a brilliant passage of play where Ethan Brooks, who had an injured right hand and was joined by number 11 Jacob Duffy with about 80 or 90 runs to win.
Number 1 T20 bowler in the world, Jacob Duffy.
Sorry, number 1 T20 bowler in the world, Jacob Duffy, but a proper number 11 joined with you think the game was basically done, then you look back at the scorecard a few overs later and all of a sudden Worcestershire right back in it. So Ethan Brooks ends up making 88. He's just hit his 7th six to bring the runs required down to within 30. He'd also just marshalled the strike superbly, so Duffy didn't add a run to their 66 run stand, but also only faced 12 balls because of how well Brooks was managing the situation. So he hits that 6 off Jamie Porter. Next ball, Porter manages to sort of outfox him. He gets sort of a leading edge splice of the bat that spoons back to the bowler. Porter dives, claims a low catch, and Essex all celebrate. But Brooks stands there. He's sort of pointing down the wicket, pointing at Porter. Porter's pointing back. They're exchanging a few words. Brooks looks again at the umpire, who sort of raises a sort of a reluctant finger, I guess. Brooks kind of throws his head back, shakes hands with the Essex fielder and walks off. But when you look at the replay, admittedly, it's a very grainy stream and it's hard to be absolutely certain, but it does look to me like it bounces. And Worcestershire seem to think similarly as well. They tweeted saying not the way that knock deserved to end. And they also put on their TikTok account, which is I think where counties feel they can have be a bit more liberal with what they say. They put up a clip of the final wicket with the famous Jose Mourinho, "If I speak, I'm in big trouble" audio over the top of it. So they clearly weren't too happy about it. But it was a brilliant game of cricket, definitely the game of the round. Amazing performance from Ethan Brooks and from Jamie Porter as well, who I think we should say, I don't think he's done anything wrong.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's done anything wrong in that situation. I can completely see why Porter thinks he's caught it. I think Ethan Brooks, all he was doing was waiting for the umpire to raise his finger. And again, I completely understand why the umpire's given it. I guess my question, Lawrence, is in 5 years' time, less than that, do we have TV umpires in county cricket? Because I think something like this was coming with the cameras that we have now. I think more likely would be something like a run out at the end of the game, which the cameras show that the umpires might not have got it right. But this one, I agree with Ben. You can't 100% tell, but I think it's more likely than not the ball at some point touched the ground. Well,
I mean, we see this all the time in international cricket, where even with the benefit of or the old foreshortening argument, isn't it? Was would it have settled it either way? It's interesting. The umpires have the little eye-hawk cameras, don't they, in their pocket, which the ECB use to mine data and make all sorts of judgments about players. That does, of course, depend on the umpire sort of facing the right way at the right time. And the problem, of course, as you're saying, was it was grainy, wasn't it? You couldn't really tell. Had he been given not out, I don't think Essex could have had too many complaints. My guess is Essex would still have won. Mm-hmm. They still needed 28. But yeah, hell of a finish.
Mm. Elsewhere in the division, actually no, let's go to Division 2. Leicestershire versus Lancashire I thought was a really interesting game. So Leicestershire were well on top, and like many games in this round, didn't get over the line mainly because of the weather. On Leicestershire, let's start positively first. They're top of the table with a fascinating side. They've got Ben Mike at number 11, who averages 25 with a bat in first-class cricket, 11 first-class half centuries. Rehan Ahmed this week opened the batting for the second week in a row and scored 100. Will he be opening against Zimbabwe first test of the summer?
You wouldn't put anything past the Bazballers, would you? No, I don't think so. But it's interesting. Counties are often accused of not using young spinners properly. Leicestershire are using him in a laterally thinking way. He's not. I think he's bowled 100 overs and taken 30 overs and taken 1 for 100. So early season conditions, they're not using his leg spin, but they've looked at his batting talent, and that is as it should be. And actually, Shoaib Bashir is a poor batsman, and that is a problem for a spinner at international level. Duncan Fletcher always used to say your spinner needs to bat because he may only come into it in the second innings. So he's got to offer stuff the rest of the time. It's why he liked Ashley Giles. Ideally, your spinner is at 8. And Rana could clearly do that. And has done pretty well in Test cricket so far. He turns it both ways as well. I know England are very interested in the height and bounce that Bashir can get. Is a leg spinner with a googly who can bat and throws himself around in the field any worse an option?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how little he was used over the winter. He was picked in every squad, but didn't play that much. And actually, in that final test of the Pakistan tour, he was really good and was perhaps under-bowled, which is probably one of the first times you could accuse Ben Stokes of not bowling the most enterprising option enough. But I think that was a fair accusation to make on that tour. But yeah, Leicester are going very well. They've got some really, really good signings. So someone like Ian Holland, who was a good Division 1 all-rounder, he's doing a really good job for them. Tom Scrivens, who's been there for a couple of years, didn't get much game time at Hampshire. He's doing well there too. So they're top of the table.
And not only do they bat deep, but they're really making the most of that by playing a really aggressive brand of cricket as well. Obviously, it helps when you have Ryan Arbin and Sol Budinger opening. But I think this was the first time they've not got full batting bonus points. And that's obviously quite hard to get when you have to get 450 and 100 overs. You have to really go to get that. And they basically seem like they're going for that every game, which obviously is helping them push for results, but is also makes sense from a points perspective as well.
And then Lancashire fans are not happy. It's not been a good return to Division 2.
No, it hasn't, and it kind of continues it obviously continues on from last season when they got relegated, finished second bottom, and continues a tough few years for Dale Benkenstein as a coach, sort of across Gloucestershire and then Lancashire. So it was I've gone through the numbers. So at Gloucestershire in 2022, they're in Division 1. They finished bottom, got relegated. In 2023, didn't win a game all season, finished bottom of Division 2, and then gets a move to Lancashire, which you'd think it feels an odd move for one of the biggest clubs in the land, who are at that point thinking that they can push for think they would have started 2024 based on the players in their squad, as one of the title contenders, perhaps, or sort of at least in the mix for a mid-table finish, end up getting relegated there, and then it's kind of happening again. You look at the squad and think that a top three that contains a test quality opener in Keaton Jennings, another player who, if England had a different selection philosophy, would probably have played for them in Josh Bohannon, and then Marcus Harris, who's always had a very good county record and has done good things for Australia. You'd think that would be a good enough top four to not be in this situation now. There's still a long way to go across the season, but yeah, it's not been a good start. And I think it just feels like not that none of those guys, that they're not all complete grinders, but there's certainly been a lack of sort of energy from their bat on it, which means they're just getting stuck at times in not pushing the game on, and then find themselves all of a sudden having to chase it or battle out for draws. So yeah, they're in a tricky situation. I was actually looking back, because working out what's like almost like why Benkenstein got that job, and I feel like his work at Durham as a player captain at times must have had something to do with it. And at Hampshire, he had a better time between 2014 and 16, but even that didn't end great. So they won promotion 2014, third last in 2015, but stayed up. And then 2016, he leaves partway through the season for family reasons, but they end up getting relegated. When he leaves, their bottom. They didn't qualify for the T20 Blast quarterfinals, which at that point they were doing sort of routinely. So it's Lancashire fans are not best pleased with him, and looking through the record historically, you can kind of see why.
There's one bit of your editor's notes on county cricket I thought was quite interesting, where you I thought politely called out conservatism in county cricket, and I thought there was a very good demonstration of this week. Gloucestershire versus Kent. Gloucestershire, as Ben illustrates, haven't won many games in the last few years. I think they haven't actually won a single home game in 4 years. They declared leaving Kent 413 from 41 overs and get Kent 6 down. And actually, Zach Crawley does a really important job for Kent. He ends up 50-odd not out to save the game effectively. Why? Why did they leave so little time?
Well, perhaps part of the answer is in your question. They are not used to winning games. Although the curious thing is that their captain is an Australian, who are not generally accused of being conservative. It felt like Gloucestershire started the day behind the game, and they were not quite sure what the moment was to potentially risk throwing away their hard work and offering Kent 300 off 55 overs. But again, that is conservative. That is the definition of conservative thinking. They've thrown away great chance to win, and to get Kent 6 down at the end is kind of the worst case scenario in a way for Gloucestershire, because it just showed that another 15 overs they might have won that game. It was a ludicrous decision, really.
Can imagine Cameron Bancroft almost feeling bad every time they took a wicket. Like, oh no.
Well, yes, crazily. Yeah.
And you're famously a Northants supporter, Lawrence. How is the Darren Lehmann revolution going at Wantage Road? One of a few very high-profile Division 2 coaches.
Yeah, it was interesting. Had you asked me that after the first 2.5 days of the season when they were bundled out for less than 150 twice by Kent, I'd have sort of rolled my eyes and said, same old, same old. But Lehmann came out with a comment after that game. He said, bats cost £500. Why don't you use them? 3 of Northants players have been out shouldering arms in the second innings of that game. Dudgeon had knocked them over with 7 for... And since then, they got 496 against Lancashire and might have won that game with the on-loan leggy Calvin Harrison from Notts took 11 wickets. And then 500 for 8 against Derbyshire. And the last day was rained out. Derbyshire might have saved it. They were kind of 3 down and not many ahead. But that is certainly better than the Kent game. So whether Lehmann has said something, surely coaching can't be as simple as use your bat. or maybe it is.
Well, I was going to ask you, how much impact can a coach actually make? Something like batting, quite often it's literally our job, but sometimes we spend ages analysing dismissals. But often it's just weird stuff, right? A ball bounces a little bit more than the batter expected, or there's a bit of inconsistent bounce, there's a bit of movement off the seam. The coach surely doesn't have that much control over that sort of stuff, particularly in a 3-game period.
No, I'd say it's a confidence thing. It's what McCullum and Stokes have tried to do with the Test team, is encourage them to be the best version of themselves, and they won't have a go at them if they get out doing it. I mean, we were talking off air about Saif Saib, the young Northants player who's always looked very talented, but his average has sort of been mid to late 20s. Now he's got 100 in the last 2 games. Now perhaps he's someone who's flourishing under Lehmann. Perhaps Lehmann sees a talent there that wasn't brought forth properly by previous regimes. And of course, when Lehmann says stuff, people are going to listen because of his track record. He's coached Australia, for goodness sake. If he can't get them going, probably no one can.
On to the other games in Division 1, there was a bit of a ball draw and a flat one at Hove between Sussex and Surrey. Hundreds for Tom Haynes, Ollie Pope and Dan Lawrence. Dan Lawrence, a very fun innings at one point. I think he hit 7 sixes and at one point hooked Ollie Robinson for 2 sixes in and over. There's a lot of bad light moaning again. I know we talked about that on last week's show, but generally it sounded like everyone there agreed they went off way too early on day 3, continuing an early season trend across the country. Really, Tom Haynes is someone I've always liked, but have never been able to get too excited about because he's never played in Div 1. So seeing him score a couple of Div 100s against good attacks early on the season is good. Johnny Bairstow hit a really important 86 not out for Yorkshire on the final day to hold Durham off before the rain came. Durham on top in that game. But yeah, Bairstow basically ensured that Yorkshire got far enough ahead before the rain came to secure the draw for Yorkshire.
He's quietly started the season pretty well, Best. I mean, they got beaten that first game, but he made a 50 in the second innings, and then obviously they have that massive win in the second game. And actually, there's a little niggling thought at the back of the head that's like, is the Bairstow story definitely done? Or if England are in trouble either against India or in Australia and they need an experienced head who they know has got test runs and he's in form, could that possibly be something they go down? It felt like it ended very suddenly at the end of that India series when he'd had one bad series after having been the main man, albeit with a broken leg in between. And I just wonder, could there be another chapter left to write? I don't know.
I think it's England's most, maybe England's most ruthless dropping was Bairstow. I think people potentially got tired of the Bairstow story, so it wasn't commented on as much. But you're right, he had one bad series. The series before that against Australia, I know there's a lot of chat around his keeping. He averaged 40 with the bat. He did okay with the bat, and before that, he was the main man before the leg break. Yeah, I think it's very unlikely. But with Bairstow, you know that he doesn't think the story's over.
He's got to get fitter than he is. That's one of England's concerns. Have they ever got over the fact that he played in the Ashes last summer when he wasn't fully, by his own admission, the Manchester Test where he scores 99 and is suddenly, giving it that. And he makes the point that how would you have coped if you'd broken a leg? And actually the Edgbaston Test, people talk about the declaration.
Yeah.
The reason England lost that Test was because, really, I'm afraid, because Bairstow missed a couple of chances. Cameron Green stumped on Naught first innings, not going for the Khawaja catch off Anderson's early second innings. England win that Test if he goes for that and takes it, and probably win the Ashes. So look, I don't want to put too much on him, but fitness is the big thing.
Yeah, and I suppose there aren't any spots left at the moment. They've got too many batters as it is. Notts came close to victory against Warwickshire. Again, rain got in the way of a result there. I think barely 7 sessions were played across the game. There was a brilliant innings from Hasib Hamid. He carried his bat for 138. Warwickshire were bowled out for 93 in the first innings. Brett Hutton and Fergus O'Neill took all 10 wickets between them. Fergus O'Neill's really good. He could play for Australia, averages basically 20, maybe even less than 20 now in first class cricket. Only 24, can bat as well.
He's a problem, yeah. I think the 2029 Ashes, we might well be talking quite a lot about Fergus O'Neill because he's tall as well. He's not that quick, but that's the only thing when you look at his attributes as a cricketer. He doesn't bowl a bad ball. I mean, because that 5 from the first innings, it looks good when you see it. It was 5 for 19, but it was off 16 overs as well. There was just nothing to hit. He also then smashes a really quick 50, so he can bat too. Yeah, he's a proper cricketer. I know. Yeah.
And between Hampshire and Somerset, another game where the rain was very annoying. It basically stopped Hampshire getting close to victory. They were well ahead in the game, but Sean Dixon scored 77 in the third innings for Somerset to prevent the sort of collapse that was required for a result there. And the final game that we've not mentioned, Middlesex versus Gloucestershire here at Lord's. A good win for Middlesex, who I just think look like a very good team at the moment. They've got most bases covered. Ben, the IPL has been happening. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, I think the big story this week is, let's say 2 young cricketers, but one very young cricketer is Vaibhav Suryavanshi making his IPL debut at the listed age of 14. Now, that there is an interview that he gave in September, or he gave it in 2023, saying he would turn 14 at the end of September 2023. So if we take his word there, then he'd be 15 now. So either way, he's the youngest IPL cricketer ever by some distance. And either way, the shots he's able to play for a kid his age are extraordinary. It's not as if, he was put in to open the batting on that debut, and there's no sort of nerves whatsoever. The bat flow is amazing, hitting sort of these sixes over extra cover, which normally require quite a lot of power, which he obviously, it's different to Parrott's timing that he's got here. Yeah, he looks like he's done loads in U19 cricket already. He made an U19 Test 100 against Australia. He played first class cricket again at the listed age of 12 or 13, depending on which version you got on. Either way, very, very young to be playing a 4-day game of cricket. So he is obviously very exciting.
A trend that you're on top of, and I know we mentioned before, is that increasingly the IPL teams are not using all their overseas spots. And actually, it may become, given the talent in India, an increasingly self-reliant competition, less reliant on overseas players.
Yeah, it's an interesting little trend, I guess. That partly you might have said this is because if you're trying to construct a team in other T20 competitions, if you are reliant, say in the T20 Blast, for example, if you're reliant on overseas players to get you through the group stages, then you actually there's a decent chance that by the time that knockouts roll around, you'll have lost them. And all of a sudden your strategy's kind of gone. In the IPL, that's obviously less of an issue now. They've got all these rules in place that mean that players are very discouraged from dropping out. But still, it seems like that it is just the Indian players that are the best. Basically, Gujarat Titans and Delhi Capitals, the 2 best teams in the competition so far, are not using their 4 overseas slots. Look, still, if you are the very, very best player in the world, like Nicholas Pooran, you're going to add loads to your side. Josh Butler's doing very well. But it also feels like maybe they're looking for those players to almost fill more roles in a way. Like Phil Salt is doing well for RCB, but because he can be the ultra aggressor at the top that allows Kohli to kind of to bed in, that is it's an interesting little subplot in the IPL that actually just with how, just to be, and also interesting that's come with the expansion of 10 teams having happened not that long ago. There was talk when that happened that do they need to go to 5 overseas players so they could spread the domestic talent a bit more thickly, I guess. And actually, now you have such strength and depth across all Indian cricket that they're not even needing the overseas players as much. So yeah,
and I find it amazing that these people with no domestic record, even in the regional Indian competitions, are being discovered and they're really good in the IPL against the best players in the world straight away.
That's the other thing. I think the scouting systems have improved absolutely massively. So for a lot of these players, you'll look at them and think like, oh, well, they've not played a professional game before, but actually they're playing what is really high level cricket in, say, the Delhi Premier League. It's just not got official T20 status, so it doesn't show up on a Cricinfo scorecard. But the IPL scouts have realised they can go here and they're better at working out what will translate to the big stage, and that is the thing as well. So the other teenager to play is Ayush Matra making his CSK debut at the age of 17, so he's their youngest ever player.
And he's another Mumbai batting prodigy.
Yeah,
as
he
well.
is. Yeah, and again, he instantly takes edge. It's a quick 30 odd, and also these kids all they get it. Basically, they just get what T20 cricket needs, and there's no sort of like, imagine being a 14-year-old playing the biggest game of your career, and you're not worried about getting a big score. You're just like, right, I'm out here to hit my first ball for 6, and that's what he does. It is astonishing.
And Josh Buttler looks happy.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, obviously, and we talked a lot about his eyes, but the smile is there at the moment, and that's great. He's been really practicing smiling, and that's still there from his last days as England captain. Two other things from the IPL though. We had an amazing game between Punjab Kings and Kolkata Knight Riders, where Punjab Kings make 111. I think Kolkata Knight Riders think, we're going to be able to boost our net run rate up a bit here. So go out and play some shots against the new ball. All of a sudden, they're 2 down. There's a bit of a partnership between Rana and Raghavanshi, so they get up to 62 for 3, and they think like, right, okay, we've seen it off. And then they collapse again. And then Andre Russell, you think he's going to do it at the end. He's hitting 60 to 17 off 11. Janssen bowls him off the inside edge. They're 9 to 5 all out. It's the lowest defence in IPL history. And this is after last year, possibly at the same venue, Punjab Kings had chased the biggest total in IPL history against Kolkata Knight Riders. And now they've defended the lowest over total. So it's not totally a batter's game. And I think the other thing that is just quite funny this week is Kohli and Dhoni both being named player of the match and not being very happy about it, basically, because they had teammates they felt had done better. So both were given the award and being like, hang on, why are you giving this to me? With the obvious, answer from the reverse being because you're Kohli and Dhoni. But yeah.
And you've got a minute on the PSL.
Yeah, I don't know if we even need a minute, but there's another youngster there is Ali Raza, who is...
Well, not heard about him.
16, 17. He was a star of the U19 World Cup semi-final last year when Pakistan almost defended a very low total against Australia. He bowled Constance with an in-swinger in the 10th over. And obviously, Sam Constance has gone on to be pretty good. So him to do that, he takes 4 for, they don't quite go over the line, but he was brilliant in that game. And then on debut, he takes 4 for 21 in a game his side win comfortably, but the wickets are 4 international caliber batters, Kamran Ghulam and Iftikhar Ahmed from Pakistan, and Michael Bracewell, and maybe Ashton Turner was the other one. Can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, he looks very good. Ian Bishop really, really likes him. And if Ian Bishop really likes someone, then he's probably a pretty good cricketer. And then also you've got Babar Azam, who is he started with 0, 1 and 2 in his first 3 innings, and then somehow got even worse, even though he hit 44 or 41 in his next innings. He was 10 off 20 at one point and sort of caught up. But yeah, maybe this is what he needed to get himself back into form. And obviously he can be a very useful and high, he can score a high volume of runs in T20 cricket, if not quickly. But also it's a weird situation with his side where they're very batting strong anyway. So they don't want him to be making, 60 or 45 because they have loads of guys who can make, 35 off 20. So it's an interesting situation from a team point of view, but also from a personal point of view when he's had a tough, long time now. And it's kind of getting worse before it gets better at the moment.
And finally, in Bangladesh are playing Zimbabwe in a game that at the moment, at the end of day 3, is fairly evenly poised. Bangladesh bowled out for 191 in the first innings. Zimbabwe responded with 273, and Bangladesh going all right in their second innings, 194 for 4 at the moment. England fans, you'll be wanting to follow how Zimbabwe do closely. They're obviously England's opponents in exactly a month's time. And finally, the Wisden Awards aren't the only award show in town at the moment. Very soon we'll be finding out the winner of the Cricket Book of the Year award at the Charles Tyrwhitt Sports Book of the Year Awards. I spoke to WCM's review editor, Jon Hotten, about the shortlisted books for this year's prize. Something slightly different for the next bit of the show. We're delighted to be joined by Jon Hotten. Jon, I think this might be your pod debut. Is that right?
It might be. Yeah, I think it is. I think we've had a couple of near misses in the past, but yeah, very glad to be here. Thank you.
For listeners who aren't magazine subscribers, Jon is a long-time reviews editor at the magazine, and more generally is just a wonderful cricket writer. And I'd wholeheartedly recommend Jon's Substack arrangements of white and green. Just one question about your role as reviews editor. Do you have time to read non-cricket books?
Well, actually, that is the thing. That's a question I've started to kind of address myself, because you there are a lot of cricket books. People think you go to the section in Waterstones and they've got 5 or 6 titles. the thing to do is pick up Wisden each year and see the list of books that they're sent. They record every book that they get sent. Pretty much what they get sent, I get sent, which is very nice. It's great to be sent books. I'm never going to turn that down. But there are a lot. So you kind of have to just sort of the good thing about the magazine is we review sort of 1 or 2 books in depth rather than trying to review everything, because I sort of think that's a fairer way of doing it, because then I do read the book properly and write something that's kind of connected to it in a way, rather than trying to do a paragraph on everything, which ends up serving no one in many ways. So that's what we try and do. Yeah, there's a hell of a lot of cricket books. I do get time to read other books because I've made myself do that now, because I really want to, and I don't just want to read cricket books, which would drive me insane. Because some of them, I mean, with the best one, I mean, Jon Hotten famously, he used to write the Wisden Almanack book reviews every year, and he would write something on everything he got sent. And even from year one, he was being sent like 70 or 80 books, most of which were a bloke sitting down, and it's always a bloke, in their living room, offering up a history of their favourite county cricketer. And Arlott came up with these fantastic euphemisms from time to time, like deeply researched, always meant kind of incredibly boring. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of thing too. But hopefully the books we're going to talk about now, this does not apply to.
Yeah, I only thought that because in nowhere near the same scale as you, but I have to read a few books throughout the year for interviews I do on the podcast. And I often think, this is great, but this is interrupting my reading schedule.
And also, I mean, I have to be honest, there are like some books you might start and then you go, right, we're not going to do this any depth. And you will just pick this. And sometimes you get like a day to read something. Some of the bigger autobiographies. I don't know if there's one on this list or not. Jimmy Anderson, for an example. Publishers are going big on that. They paid a lot of money for it. So, their reviews, time slots are much more limited than with the other books. So you might only get a day to read something like that, given the deadline with the magazine as well. So then sometimes inevitably you're skimming,
Anyway, so the Charles Tyrwhitt Sports Book of the Year Awards is coming up shortly, and there are 6 books shortlisted in the Cricket Book of the Year category. I'll go through them quickly now. So the book that Phil famously did with Brian Lara, The England Chronicles, Getting Out by John Campion, It's Not Banter, It's Racism by Azim Rafiq, On Cricket by Sir Trevor McDonald, Richie Benno's Blue Suede Shoes by David Kynaston and Harry Ricketts, and Bill Edridge by Leo McKinstry. Lots of different types of books there. Let's start with the one that we're most familiar with, and that's Phil's book with Lara. I suppose for people who love Lara, he's not actually said a lot publicly in his post-playing career. He's not someone who's done a whole amount of media, and this is his first really substantial book of this sort.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. My view on that is, I think, and I saw him a little bit, not sort of name dropping, saw him a little bit over the summer. I think he's at a place in his life where he personally is coming to a kind of reckoning with his past. I mean, if you remember, and I don't know how many people remember Lara as a player, he was an equivocal figure. He wasn't like Viv Richards, who was, the great West Indies batsman of the previous generation, who very much embodied what West Indies cricket was. Lara did in a different way, in that the greatness was beginning to fracture at this time. In fact, Lara's batting essentially held that greatness for just a little bit longer. So I think he's at a reckoning point, and he's trying to look back and make sense of what happened to him, because he was a young man where, you think of the age he was when he broke the record first time round, the 375 in 94, a very young man, and he just before, that 6 weeks of batting had scored 270 odd or whatever it was in Sydney. It was very much, to suddenly go from nothing, there's a terrific section in Phil's book where Lara describes his first tour of England, where essentially he's Viv Richards' driver, and that's all he's doing. To, go from that to becoming this, global superstar who's given a house in Trinidad after his, after he breaks the record and all this kind of thing. I mean, it does, obviously it messes with your mind. Fame is a mask that eats the face, as they say. And, Lara, I think I don't think he was at an age where he fully understood himself when he became world famous, and that is always very difficult. There's that theory with rock stars that you remain the age at which you became famous, and that I don't think Lara has done that, maybe a bit, but I think he's at this place where there's a reckoning with the past, and that's why he wanted to do something serious, as opposed to, I've read his other book, basically a quick knockoff when he retired. This is me remembering my innings, if I can even remember them. He brought a lot more to this process. I've had a couple of conversations with Phil about what Lara was like, because this relationship between ghost and subject is always a difficult one. It's got to be right. If it's right, you get a bit of magic. If it's wrong, things can go go downhill very quickly. I think there also always needs to be an idea these days behind these books. Even when Felix White did Jimmy Anderson's book, looking up at a career of that kind when it's so vast, it's like looking up at Everest, and you go, where do I start? What am I going to do here? What? And Felix kind of got around that in a particular way by doing something a bit more sort of episodic and thematic in places. And Phil and Fairfield, the publishers, have kind of gone, well, let's just approach the England side of Lara's batting first. Luckily that includes the big records and those kind of things. But, there are lots of other bits of Lara's career that, might still be to come if they do follow through doing the other books they wanted to do. But I think that gave it an angle and gave Lara a kind of jumping off point that enabled him to think about these things in a certain way. So I think in that respect, it was a huge success. And Phil, I have to say, Phil is a ghostwriter, and it's a difficult job to do because, where does the ghost end and the subject begin? You have to kind of, you can't just take their voice, but you can't just do it in your voice. You have to meld the two somehow and come up with something that sounds authentic, but it's a bit of you and a bit of them, essentially. And Phil's got a bit of swagger himself, as listeners to the pod know, I'm sure, So that kind of helps, there was that kind of match as well there, which I think worked very well.
Yeah, and I think from a narrative point of view, it was simultaneously celebratory of an amazing career, but also there was a sort of sadness to it as well, in terms of getting across Lara's desire almost to be appreciated and loved a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, and there was a little bit of a flare-up, wasn't there, between him and Richards over something he'd said in the book. But he is overshadowed by this figure of Richards. And look, I saw them both. I saw a lot of Viv Richards, and I saw all of Brian Lara. And take it from me, no one was as good as Lara. You can, the Viv Richards fans, yes, he has this kind of, Richards has this psychological hold over the generation of cricketers that he played with, a lot of whom are now in the media and so on. And he was the greatest batsman of his generation. And it's not necessarily fair to compare across. But Lara was a one-off. Lara was a genius. No one could make big scores in the way that Lara made them, at the speed he made them, not probably since Bradman. He was an extraordinary figure. And I think he's trying to reclaim a little bit of that, Some of those innings, there's a quote from Angus Fraser, where he says, if you look at the list of the 20 best test innings ever played, Lara's played about 5 or 6 of them. It's astonishing. He was an astonishing player. And I think, the book goes away to sort of making his case for that, really, which is nice.
Going further back in time, 2 of the books on the shortlist are about older figures, Richie Benaud and Bill Edrich.
Yeah.
On books of this genre, where you look at someone from more generations further back than someone like Lara, what are you looking for? Because I think there's a danger that when you go that far back, it can be a little bit dry. So how do books like these bring their subject to life, really?
Well, these are these are very different books, which is a great thing to talk about. But you're right. Yeah, mining cricket's past is all very well, but you have to bring something to that. You have to bring an almost a modern sensibility to that in order for it to make sense apart from anything else. I think David Kynaston, who co-wrote the Richie Benaud book, that was the one that sort of passed me by a bit. We didn't review that in any depth, so I don't want to sound off about it too much. But Kynaston's a very, very well-respected social historian who's written about cricket and lots of other things, and he can kind of see cricket from that why who only cricket know kind of point of view. And Benno's a really interesting subject because, again, everyone knows Richie. He's become this figure. I mean, I don't know if everyone knows he was a player, because even me, when I was growing up, he was a commentator, and it took me years to know he'd actually been a player. He was just like this guy who everyone revered as a commentator.
And a good one as well.
Oh, a really good player. Yeah, I mean, people talk about his leg spin. I mean, again, those players that exist in that kind of weird, Pathé era of before everything was broadcast live, and if you just missed that and just missed colour TV, your career seems like something from the deep past, and you're never going to get that kind of up close analysis of Benno's hand in the way that he would do the up close analysis of Warne's hand. Here's his flipper and here's this and here's that, but Benno was a really interesting character, but again, it says something about, he's a captain of Australia who did all these kind of great things as a player. Actually, while he was a player, went off and trained as a journalist because he knew he had to do something after cricket, because in those days, there was no, retirement after cricket. You had to go and get another job because no one was paying you enough cash to just go and play golf or whatever it is you want to do these days, So as social history, you would read David Kynaston and enjoy that. I think Bill Edrich is different, and Leo McKinstry is a different kind of writer, and he's a brilliant. And I have to go back slightly to Geoffrey Boycott to this, because Leo McKinstry wrote a superb book called Boyks, which is, much as he's done about Bill Edrich, just a biography of Geoffrey Boycott. Geoffrey, I've subsequently come to know, and he didn't authorize the book, but he did let McKinstry talk. He gave permission for him to talk to various people around him. And God, that book's funny. I mean, the stories about Boycott are hilarious, both pro and anti. And I've said to Geoffrey, I love that book. I don't, and half of it's not true, it's a bit, but so McKinstry's great at this kind of taking a subject and looking at them almost through anecdote, but through lots of angles, through their friends and through their, colleagues and so on and so forth. Now, Bill Edrich is a bit too far back to do that, but I kind of knew the name of Bill Edrich, but didn't know much about him. This book is an absolute barnstormer. It's my favorite book of the year, by a mile. It's tremendous. I mean, and if you want to go back to that sort of era, Edrich began his career just as the Second World War broke out. So he played a few kind of first class and tests and stuff. And then the war happens, and he goes off and becomes a fighter pilot. And, he's like all these missions that he flies in the circumstances they did this were just insane. You could basically, if you could drive a car, they sort of thought, you'll be able to fly a plane because it's basically just a tin box that goes up in the air. And they're off, with like 6 weeks of training, they're off flying these missions, And there were a couple of times he, almost didn't come back. There's one where, vividly and brilliantly described by Leo McKinstry, where you don't want to be in a position in the plane. I'm saying this like I know. You don't want to be in a position where in a plane where your opponent is flying in sort of on top of you, because they can just fire down on you. And he gets in that position. The Germans coming down towards him to essentially finish him off. His plane has already been disabled, and the guy goes to pull the gun, and there's no ammo left. And they both just kind of nod at each other. I mean, they're literally that close. He nods at the German guy, and then the German guy nods at him, and they both fly off. And they both fly home. I mean, it just seems incredible, And he comes back from that and then plays cricket. His character is kind of altered by that. I mean, he's an appalling womanizer. I mean, he cannot leave it. And he's married about 5 times. McKinstry goes through all of that brilliantly. He cannot see a woman that he doesn't want to pursue. There's something about, he's described as a rat, and he's kind of sort of slightly rat-like. He kind of scurries about, and drinks, has that. I suppose if you've been through something like, the war, you have a completely different attitude to life, and cricket certainly. And, he was an astonishing figure. And I just highly recommend the book. It's funny, it's moving. It's an action adventure. It's terrific. Yeah.
It sounds like what I need to add to my list. I guess like his history of being a fighter pilot in World War II perhaps puts what he averages against Australia into
context. Yeah. But there's like a great moment where he goes on tour, and it essentially emerges that he's really on tour with England because, his womanizing, camouflaging the tour manager and captain's own womanizing. Tremendous stuff he's found out. Really, really good. Highly recommended, yeah.
An eye-catching name on the list is Sir Trevor McDonald. I suppose he's a very well-known cricket fan, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is this the first time he's written a book on cricket?
I think it is directly on cricket. I think he's, I think he's, the most... You know why this book exists. It's a gift book. It's a nice gift book. It's, you're in Waterstones who are all going to stock it. And, I need something for dad or granddad. Oh, he likes cricket, doesn't he? And Trevor's a nice bloke. He likes Trevor McDonald. That's the present sorted out. But that's to do it a slight disservice. He obviously really does know and love cricket. And, writes about it. Well, I mean, look, it's not nitty gritty. It's not Bill Edrich. It's not Lara, but it's intelligent, it's nuanced, and if you're buying it as a gift book for someone, they will enjoy it. I'm sure. I'm not sure it necessarily fits with everything else on this list. Big secret prize. I'm sure everyone from the Oscars downwards knows. Sometimes people get on lists because you want to invite them because they're going to bring a bit of star power to your show, and I'm sure that Sir Trev sits in that category, and I'm sure he'd be very pleased to be there and be very avuncular once he is there. He's lived a great life, and I'm sure a book prize isn't the be all and end all for him.
Another eye-catching name on the shortlist is that of Azim Rafiq. It's not banter, it's racism. It's been a few years now since I think it's 5 years this summer since the Rafiq story originally broke. It is pushing, I think it's 3.5 years since his famous appearance at the DCMS committee at the end of 2021. How do you reflect on this book from Azim? And I suppose at an interesting time where cricket would perhaps like to think it's completely moved on and moved forward, but it's perhaps not completely the case.
No, I mean, I don't think it has. I don't think, it's not really for me to say. I mean, I think, it's interesting you look at this book in the context of a few years down the line, because when I reviewed it, I was like very self-conscious because look, I'm a sort of aging white guy, how am I going to be able to judge what the impact of words are on someone like him? Now, some of those things in that book, to me, as the aforementioned aging white, you kind of go, oh, well, why, that doesn't seem that bad, does it? But that's because I'm not putting that in the context of his experience and the context of his life, where you get, the looks in the supermarket, or you get the offhand comment, and you're just supposed to jolly along with it and live with it. And, fair play to him, he stands up and says, no, I don't want to live with it. I think, again, talking of sort of equivocal figures, Azim is a bit like that. I mean, there's not, there's stuff on both sides of the ledger with him, which again kind of makes him an interesting hero, because it's almost like a kind of, I mean, again, I don't want to diminish it by comparing, but almost like a Tom Wolfe novel. You would pick a flawed hero as your central figure, and Azim is probably, humanly flawed as any of us, and has fought back against this kind of stuff. And there is no doubt that the reaction within Yorkshire to what happened was probably went too far the other way, and people got caught up in that. But my kind of response to that would be, but there's a whole generation of people have been caught up the other way. There's people play cricket in leagues where you don't see, some don't see a brown face, some don't see a white face. It's just it's very divided, and I think some of it does come from club cricket, and I don't think club cricket has resolved that. I really don't, because again, it comes down to this clash of cultures where some a lot of cricket clubs survive by money going over the bar, where you don't get out if no one drinks. It is a kind of cultural clash in a way, and Azim Rafiq became the point of the arrow, and that's why it really became interesting. I think it's an interesting book. I think it, again, I had to do the Wisden review of media. They every year the Almanack reviews, the impact of in the year of that he had gone to the DCMS. And I look back now what I wrote, and I was probably too far kind of his way in a way, because that, there probably could have been a bit more focus on the other side of what happened at Yorkshire. There was too much of a correction, but again, that correction was due in whatever way it happened, in my view. And so, if a few, it's terrible to say, but if people get caught up in that, well, that's what's been happening the other way. It's a bit like the, what happened in South Africa when they came out of apartheid. Yes, there were careers and lives destroyed on the other side, but that was part of the correction to get where it is now. That's not great. It's not to say it's right, but that's sort of what happened. So, tremendously interesting book. And, I think, I hope he finds some peace, because he didn't get any peace after this, after standing up and saying it, he wasn't left alone, So I hope he can, because, he'll always be that name that's attached to that, in the way that, through cricket history, other names are attached to other things,
And finally, a book on Ukraine, Getting Out, very different to the other ones on this list.
Yeah, John Campion. I mean, I read it a while ago, so I don't want to kind of overstep here again by just blathering off about what it is. What struck me when I read it, and it is about, cricket still existing in Ukraine, just before the conflict began, and then what has sort of happened subsequently. It becomes a book about what happens subsequently. It's obviously a labour of deep love for John Campion. He knows all these people and has followed these people at, great depth and probably at some cost. And the amazing part of the book is that you get to the end and it just becomes this list of people that have died in the, who were in the book, who have died. And I think that extends, I think I put in the review, that extends to something like 19 pages, which just gives you an idea of what is going on, and how much cricket pertains to it. I don't know. I mean, cricket has these little pockets of support all over, doesn't it? Estonia or wherever else it's somehow played by expats. But yeah, I mean, again, if you want to read about Ukraine through the lens of cricket, then it's a terrific book.
A really nice, diverse shortlist. John, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having you on. Fascinating.
Yeah, no, pleasure.
And we should do it again sometime.
Well, let's not leave it too long.
That is everything for today's show. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, yes.
And as always, we're going to include the link to the 2025 Wisden in the show notes. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast, and a reminder that we are proudly partnered with Remitly. Cheering the teams we love is what it's all about, and the team we love most fiercely is family. Millions of people around the world trust Remitly to send money safely, quickly and affordably to their loved ones, making sure that more of the money they send reaches back home, because at the end of the day, family matters most. Ready to give Remitly a try? Download the Remitly app today and enjoy a special offer on your first transfer.